Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly review of everything MacStories and more. Today's episode is brought to you by Daylight. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico, happy Friday.
Hello, John. Happy Friday to you as well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's been one of those weeks. I guess every week's one of those weeks. It's going all right. It was a strange week in a lot of ways. I feel like we're just sitting around waiting for Apple to do an event or to release iOS 14.5 at least, and we've just been in a holding pattern to a certain degree.
Yeah, this is a good time to get everything ready. I got my story about iOS 14.5 ready to go, and it's there waiting as a draft, and I'm just focusing on other things. I'm trying new apps, and I'm checking on the news. I'm getting some reading done. I'm getting some good video game time at night before, just to relax a little. So it's good. It's fun. Kind of stressing also at the same time, because what's going to happen? We don't know. Is Apple going to drop a bunch of press releases on us?
Right. Is it going to be all compressed into one short period of time?
Like last year when they did the week of press releases, that was fun. Kind of.
It was fun until we got towards the end of the week and we were begging for them to stop so that we could have
stop. No more
have a little bit of rest.
Please. In any case, we had a bunch of interesting stuff on the website this week.
We did. I reviewed Albums 4, which is one of my absolute favorite third-party Apple Music players that are available. It's a very opinionated app that's album focused, so that it really concentrates on enjoying albums one at a time. It's possible to go through and pick and choose individual songs, but albums is like the title says, the name says, is what it's all about. And it's incredibly customizable. So check this out, especially if you're an album-centric person, because it's a really good app. And next week, we're going to be doing the second part of our series on music and music apps for App Stories. And albums is discussed in that episode too. So I'll leave it at that for today. But it's a really great app that got a 4.0 release recently, and I went back and revisited it because you and I have both used this app in the past, but it had been a little while since I'd used it extensively, and I really like what the developer did for this update.
Nice. And you also covered this new utility that Aaron Pierce made called HomePaper. Right. I believe this utility was inspired by, and I want to get this right, I believe that a few weeks ago, maybe it was Quinn Nelson on Twitter. He's Snazzy Labs on YouTube and also the co-host of Flashback with Stephen Hackett on Relay FM. I believe he did this manually for his Home app on the iPhone. So he created this beautiful wallpaper that... Actually, John, can you describe what HomePaper does? Because this utility was inspired by that, but this is a much easier way to do it all in a single utility on the iPhone.
Right. And I didn't realize that that's where that had been inspired from, but I had been following Aaron as he developed this and talked about how he did it on Twitter as well. And essentially what it is you take a photo of a room in your home, for instance, and the app automatically desaturates the photo and then overlays a gradient. And it has a bunch of built-in gradients. I mean, literally dozens and dozens of really nice gradients that you can overlay. And it's a nice way to distinguish rooms, or if you have multiple homes assigned to the Home app, you can have a different one for each of your homes. And so the combination of both the desaturated photograph as well as the color gives you a nice way, as you swipe from room to room, of quickly realizing which one you're in. Because, the Home app is a little bit generic, and Apple offers some wallpapers inside it, which are okay, but they're very limited in number and they're not that imaginative. And this adds a little personalization as well as really nice gradients to keep everything looking good and making it glanceable in terms of which room you're actually focused on.
So this happened last week after we recorded Unwind. We mentioned it in depth. We actually covered it in depth on this week's episode of App Stories. Apple announced this major expansion of Apple Arcade last week, where they're bringing classic titles to Apple Arcade. So They're expanding beyond original games, and they're bringing, they call them either App Store greats or timeless classics. These are games that you may have seen on the App Store before. Now they are available on Apple Arcade as part of a subscription, of course. They are free of in-app purchases, free of ads, obviously, and they have been updated to work with the latest and greatest iOS and iPadOS devices. These games, which include, for example, Monument Valley, and there's Frenzic from the Icon Factory that is coming soon. All of the games from Zach Gage, whom we interviewed on App Stories last year. This is a really fascinating story about Apple sort of expanding Apple Arcade beyond new titles and, trying to fill that back catalog content that so far they had sort of try to avoid doing with Apple Arcade. So that's fascinating. There's also the angle of game preservation that Apple is doing now here by bringing back some of those older titles, right? There are some of them were no longer available on the App Store. They're bringing them back and they're working with developers to restore them as part of an Apple Arcade subscription. And this is part of a bigger story that we had many times, a bigger conversation that we had many times on App Stories before, about the idea of all of these great ideas, all of these great games that are getting lost to history, that are getting lost to the fact that iOS devices, they no longer support older versions of iOS, and APIs are deprecated. Some older games can no longer be played. But those games are still great, right? Those games are still fun. If only they could run on a latest iPhone and iPad. And so Apple is sort of doing this with this expansion of Apple Arcade. So we covered the news on App Stories again, if you want to go listen to last week's episode. Also, I had a link on MacStories this week from Chris Planta, is the editor-in-chief of Polygon. And Chris makes a really good point about Apple Arcade and also Microsoft Game Pass. So Xbox Game Pass is the subscription service that you can get in a couple of different tiers that allows you to play any game on Xbox just by downloading the game from the catalog. Basically, just like Apple Arcade. You can download the game, you just pay a single subscription, you can play whatever you want. And what's interesting here is the argument is Apple and Microsoft are sort of showing what the future of the video game industry might be. Meanwhile, Sony and Nintendo are kind of stuck in the past, doing essentially nothing on this front. Nintendo recently, for whatever reason, stopped selling Super Mario 3D All-Stars for the Nintendo Switch. They brought back some older games as a compilation of 3 games in one on the Nintendo Switch. But for whatever reason, that game was only available for a limited time. And they actually pulled the game from the eShop and from Amazon and other retailers. Right. And Sony, just a few weeks ago, they announced they are going to shut down for good the online stores for the PlayStation 3, the PSP, and the PS Vita. Obviously, those consoles are no longer, those consoles are discontinued. They are no longer supported by Sony. I believe the Vita got its last software update maybe last year. But regardless of the fact that those consoles were old, the online stores were still around. So you could still boot up a PS Vita or a PSP, which I have done myself. Like, I have actually done this.
Right. In the last several weeks, you've done it, I know.
Yes. And you could log into your account and you could re-download your existing purchases, but you could still purchase old games as well. Like, you could go in and purchase a PSP game. And these stores are shutting down for good. And Sony doesn't have a real strategy in place right now. They have PS Now, which is the streaming service, but PS Now doesn't really have a back catalog content for these consoles. And so these games, effectively, they are going to disappear. And so meanwhile, Microsoft is doing all kinds of fascinating things with backwards compatibility. Microsoft is combining backwards compatibility with a subscription. Game Pass is a subscription service for new games, but it also includes older games. So it's a very intriguing approach. And Apple is sort of starting to do this now as well with Apple Arcade. So go check out the story. I basically found myself agreeing with all of it as I kept reading.
Yeah, I did too. And Nintendo, it does make me worry because I do still buy once in a great while a virtual console game on my 3DS because I've been going back and playing older games, and there's some really good ones on there that are still available for like $7 or $8, which they're still fun to play on those consoles if you have them. So it's a shame that these kind of stores are getting shut down. I will clarify one thing that we talked about on App Stories that we were a little confused about was what the difference is between arcade greats and timeless classics. And someone on Twitter pointed out to me that the timeless classics are all board games. They're backgammon and chess and checkers and that kind of thing, which Apple did not make clear at all in their press release. Sure. Nor was it particularly clear looking at the arcade tab in the App Store, but that seems to be accurate. So from what I can tell, that is in fact what's going on. Well, Federico, we had more gaming news, or at least it's related to gaming news this week, which was Apple and Epic Games.
Your favorite topic.
Yes, they filed proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law, which is a fancy way of saying that they created documents for the judge in the upcoming May 3rd trial, the antitrust trial, that are basically their version of what happened, both the facts and how they feel the law should be applied to those facts and what conclusion they want the judge to reach. So both parties filed those at like midnight Pacific time earlier this week, and they're each roughly 350 to 400 pages long. So if you really need to sleep and you haven't been sleeping well, I would highly recommend reading these, because if you want to, read a bunch of lawyers talking about the video game industry, and personally, I find it really amusing when I was reading through and found that they were citing as much to things like Reddit threads and tweets as they were to case law.
Times.
which back in my day when I was a lawyer, I'd never cited to Reddit or Twitter, just for the record. But in any event, that trial looks like it's going forward, and to me, one of the more surprising things is that it hasn't settled, and I suspect that it probably won't at this point. I mean, it could always settle, all the way up to the very day of the trial or during the trial. But the thing is, first of all, Tim Sweeney at Epic has made this very personal, and on top of that, has unleashed these arguments in front of countries all across the world that in a way that I don't think can really be stuffed back in the genie bottle. So it's hard to see it actually being resolved early, but it should make for some interesting courtroom drama in May. So stay tuned on that one, I guess.
Also this week, Apple announced the Find My Network, which is a program that will allow third-party manufacturers to plug into the Find My app via the new Items tab, which we've seen pop up in the Find My app over the past few releases of iOS. Now, this press release has 3 different companies that are making accessories that will be compatible with the Find My network, but they're not coming anytime soon. They're going to be released over the next few months. So these products from, 2 companies that I've never heard of before, and one of them is Belkin, which is the only one I know. Belkin, they're making the Soundform Freedom True Wireless Earbuds. We've seen these before at CES 2021. These are basically Belkin's version of AirPods, and you will be able to track them with the Find My app. Also, a company called VanMoof, they're integrating Find My functionality into their S3 and X3 e-bikes. Cool. You can see there's a Find My logo on the bike, which means it's compatible. And Chipolo, which it's not Chipotle, it's a different company, although it sounds kind of similar. Chipolo, they're making their one-spot item finder compatible with Find My. So this is basically a tile tracker, or what the rumored Apple AirTags are supposed to be, but it's made by Chipolo, and it's called the one-spot item finder. I think this is the right approach to open this thing up to third-party manufacturers. Let's talk about this again in a year. I want to see how many companies actually go ahead and add support for Find My. Because if companies are struggling to roll out HomeKit integrations, I'm really skeptical we're going to see a large and rich ecosystem of Find My compatible devices. Also, I said this on Connected a few weeks ago. I still don't understand. Do really people lose all those items on a regular basis? I don't get it, but I remain skeptical, personally speaking, of find my items as a concept. Like, if you're losing that many items, maybe you have a problem, and you should consider.
Maybe. Although I think the bicycle makes more sense
The
because
bicycle makes a lot. Sure, that's
those
a
are
bike.
expensive and can get stolen and that sort of thing.
It's a locomotion device. Like you use it to go around, but like I get it.
Then it rolls away from you and you lose it.
Sure, but I mean, like a bike makes sense. The other stuff, I don't know.
No, the other ones maybe not as much. All right. Finally, this week we also had an interview that was released by Kara Swisher on the podcast The Sway, and Kara Swisher interviewed Apple CEO Tim Cook about a wide range of things. It's a relatively short interview, about 35 minutes or so, but they touch on things like privacy, Facebook, the upcoming app tracking transparency, all sorts of different things, as well as whether Tim Cook is going to be around at Apple in 10 years, which I found interesting that a lot of news outlets picked up on that quote that Tim Cook was going to decide to be gone within 10 years from Apple as strange that was the headline because, he's 60 years old. I would think that he would, by the time he's 70, he'd want to retire from Apple. But
sure.
But I guess that was big news to some people. Wasn't particularly to me. That's not the part I found most interesting. He did say that iOS 14.5 was coming in a few weeks, and that was earlier this week. So, maybe we're not going to see it until May. We'll see. But good interview. If you haven't checked it out, you should check it out. And The Sway is a great podcast. Federico, what did we have in MacStories Weekly this week for club members?
I did a shortcut about appending text to the bottom of a plain text document. I call it Smart Append, in that it supports a bunch of options, including typing text, dictating text, and also doing different things, whether if you're trying to append a URL in your clipboard, it's able to detect whether it's a tweet, for example, or any other kind of web page, or just something else that is not a link. And so I've been using that a lot for my dashboard text file that I've been talking about lately, which is a place where I'm saving all kinds of notes and ideas and tasks that are not tasks yet. I'll talk about this some more over the next few weeks, but in the meantime, go check out this shortcut because I think it's really useful, especially with compact UI on the home screen. And you, John, you also did a shortcut about saving videos from YouTube and other places using Downy on the Mac. However, the command to Downy, you're sending that from your iPhone or iPad using shortcuts. So you're using SSH to connect to your Mac and send the video to Downy, which is running on the Mac, from your iOS and iPadOS device. And then the video is also saved in your Plex library, which you use to watch the video via Infuse, which is a video player for iPhone and iPad. Really cool idea. I didn't know that Downy offered support for automation. In this case, you're sending a shell script over to the Mac's shell from your iPhone and iPad.
Right. Downy's a great app on the Mac. It also supports AppleScript and a URL scheme. So there's a lot of different, options there in terms of automation. But this shell script was the easiest way to do it because really it's a very simple command where all you're doing is feeding it a URL and it will automatically kick off the download, which is pretty fun. The other thing I wrote in the club newsletter this week was a collection of movie tracking apps, both on iOS and iPadOS, plus Letterboxd, which is on Apple TV, which is actually, I'm surprised there aren't more movie trackers on Apple TV because although apps haven't really particularly taken off on the Apple TV, if there's any kind of app you would want on your Apple TV, it would be something like a movie tracker. In any event, I have a few different options there that I went over, ones that I like a lot and that do a little bit different things, one from the other, that are worth checking out if you're a movie fan. All right, Federico, how about app stories? We kicked off a mini-series, and I think this will be our longest mini-series to date because most of them have been two-parters so far. And this
At
one...
what point is it not mini anymore? That's the question.
Well, I think it's still mini at 3, but because I don't think we'll go beyond 3 with this one. But yeah, this one's going to be a 3-parter.
Yeah, we kicked it off with the how we listen episode. So this is all about music. And in the first installment, we covered all the different ways we listen to music. So we covered the hardware that we use, speakers, headphones, earbuds, my Sony Walkman, and we covered music services. So in this case, Apple Music and Spotify. And in part 2, which is coming out in a few days on App Stories, we are going to talk about apps, all kinds of apps that we use for discovery and playback of music. But there's also gonna be a part 3, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I actually kind of dread doing the show notes for the next episode because we covered so many apps. It's going to take a little while to gather all those links, but there are a ton of great music apps that you and I have tried over the years, and it's an area that I know that we keep a very close eye on, so we have a lot to say about it. Okay, Federico, this episode of Unwind and all of MacStories this week is sponsored by Daylight. Daylight is a real Mac and iOS app that empowers you and your team to handle more clients, close more deals, and execute more projects than ever before. Built exclusively for Apple users, Daylight is a native Mac CRM and project management tool for teams. You can keep track of communications with clients and the status of projects and deals all in one place, even when you don't have an internet connection. Compatible with Big Sur and M1 powered Macs, Daylight is designed to work seamlessly with many of Apple's features that you already love. Things like Apple Mail on the Mac. And you can share your contacts and calendar items as well. The app leverages features like Siri and Caller ID on your iPhone. It also has Face ID and Touch ID support. Plus, you can create contacts and other documents by pulling data from Daylight into Pages, Numbers, and Keynote. Daylight offers complimentary onboarding support to help you get the most out of Daylight. Ready to grow your business? Start your 30-day free trial right now by going to marketcircle.com. I'll put a link in the show notes too. Our thanks to Daylight for their support of Unwind and MacStories. All right, Federico, I think we're going to go and do a little something different today, and we are going to talk about a joint Unwind pick. But first, I do want to mention one thing about Arcade, and that is that The Last Campfire, which I know you have tried, that's a game on Arcade by Hello Games. It has been updated, and it has a lot more content. So if you haven't played that game, go check it out. Or even if you have, go check it out because it's got a bunch of new levels. So check that out and see what's going on. We talked about how Arcade was updated, but no new games this week. So nothing to report there. Mm-hmm. But I suspect that they'll start releasing new ones again relatively soon. I mean, they dropped so many games last week. I'm not surprised there's a little bit of a pause. But
Federico, and I wanted to mention, I've started playing Fantasian, but I haven't picked it on Unwind yet because I was only able to put in like 45 minutes into the game, and I want to play some more. I've been busy. I'm trying to finish the campaign, the single-player campaign for Titanfall 2, which I picked on Unwind a few weeks ago, and it's super good. Like, it's such a good game, but I'm trying to finish that before I really dig into Fantasian. But I have a feeling I'm going to pick it soon.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, our pick probably will come as no surprise to listeners, and that is Fearless, Taylor's version. Yep. This is the album that just was released today by Taylor Swift. If you know the backstory, her old record label that released her most of her back catalog was sold, and she lost control of the master tapes to her recordings. And there has been a dispute around all of this, but the upshot of what happened is that she is re-recording her original albums today and re-releasing them. And this album has the entire entire set list or track list from Fearless, plus a bunch of bonus material. And first thing I did this morning as I was getting the Club MacStories newsletter ready is I put that on and listened to it, and it's really, really good. And I know you've listened to not the whole thing, but a good chunk of it.
Yeah, I listened to a few songs, and I listened both to a bunch of old songs that have been re-recorded and a bunch of new songs called From the Vault, as these are previously unreleased songs. And just the quality is just incredible, and how Taylor was able to obviously like try and strike a different tone from, say, Folklore or Evermore, right? These are songs that are supposed to sound younger, right? And she was able to do that, but also you can hear the maturity in her voice. You can hear the maturity in the production, right? And I really loved. I mean, Love Story, obviously still a classic. You Belong with Me, still a classic. But I also love like the one of the new songs, Mr. Perfectly Fine. That's a super fun song, which I really like. And it's just wild, and it's kind of a testament to the quality of Fearless, which, by the way, won a Grammy as Album of the Year in 2010. Just the fact that it still sounds so good because of a production, because of this is effectively like the music equivalent of a video game remaster.
Right.
It takes everything you love, but it makes it better and it makes it sound modern. And I think it's also like beyond the music, such a powerful message to say, I'm taking back control of my masters and I'm gonna redo it all. I don't care. I'm gonna do it. And I think also for artists out there, it's also a beautiful message, and I love it. I'm all in favor of controlling your art and your craft, and this is exactly my kind of thing. So go listen to Fearless, and if you Taylor's version, and if you happen to be a Taylor super fan, do what I did and put it in order for a limited edition of the CD. So you can also own a physical copy, which, you're going to support your favorite artist that way too.
Yep. Well, this was her second album, and I think the production on this thing is amazing. And I think about it both. I mean, I just enjoy the music, full stop, in and of itself. But when you think about someone going back and re-recording something that's more than a decade old, from a very different time in her life, it had to have been really hard not to redo it too much. You know what I mean? To go back and over edit it. I mean, it definitely is different, and it's more mature, as you said, and it's excellently produced, but it's also very true to the original material in a way that I think people who were fans back when this album was released will appreciate, but can also enjoy the distinctions, the changes that have been made along the way. And I just think it strikes a really nice balance that way. All right, Federico, that's it for this week. You can find the two of us over at MacStories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next Friday, Federico.
Ciao, John.